I just got a brand new miter saw in the workshop, and if you've ever used one of these before, you know how much dust these things throw up in the air. So if you've been working on a project all day long, then everything around you is going to be covered in sawdust. They do come with these little dust bags or pouches that go on the back, but the problem is they don't collect all of the sawdust to begin with, and they fill up really fast. So as soon as that bag fills up, it's going to clog the entire saw, and it's going to start shooting all over you and everything around you. Now, I do have a few hanging air filters throughout the workshop that pick up a lot of the sawdust that's floating around in the air, but again, they don't grab everything. The best way to combat sawdust is to trap it at the source. So we're going to build what we call a dust hood around this entire miter saw that's going to hook up to our main dust collection system and pull all of that sawdust through into the dust collector before it even has a chance to get into the shop. So I've already got my dust collector hooked up to my miter saw. It just runs along this wall underneath my workbench and comes right up underneath my miter saw station. I want the miter saw to still have its full range of motion, so I'm going to extend it all the way out. So this side will be pretty easy because there's just going to be 2 cuts right there. But coming over here, I've got to go around my saw gear. So I'm going to have to go straight back and then cut back around the saw gear this way and then back to the wall. A dust hood is essentially just a big box that you build around your miter saw to help keep all of the sawdust in one place, preventing it from escaping into the air and covering everything else in your shop with sawdust. I'm not going to spend a terrible amount of time on this project because, again, at the end of the day, it's just a box that's going to sit and collect dust. So where these 2 walls meet right here, I'm going to add a 45-degree angle on this front piece. That way we can get rid of that gap right there. Pretty much seamless there. And then I 45'd this because I'm going to put a door right here and wanted it to be flush this way. I find with this project and projects similar to this in the shop, I get a better result when I build them in place. That way I can visualize each piece as I'm putting them together, especially when you have to build around different machines in the shop like my saw gear. And then to assemble, we're just going to use some glue and screws to hold everything together. I don't really plan to move the dust hood much after it's built and in its place, so I think a little wood glue, some screws, and brad nails will do just fine. So now that I got the walls up, I'm going to work on the roof of the dust hood. As many of you know, my shop was an old horse barn, so I have these poles around the perimeter that were part of the original structure, so I'm just going to cut the roof around that pole. This way the roof portion will sit flush up against the wall, so dust can't escape out the backside. The front portion of the roof that sits over the actual saw doesn't have a pitch or a slope to it, so it's going to have to be a separate section, so I'll just trace that and cut it out as well with the jigsaw. The electric cord for the saw gear actually plugs in the back side here, so I'm just going to cut a hole right through here with a 1 1/4 inch hole saw. That way I can feed the plug back through and we'll have power to the saw gear. And for the final part of this build, I want to add a couple doors that are on hinges. That way I can open and close them if I need to cut any miters or angled cuts with the saw. The door on the left side is super easy. It's just a rectangle straight up and down. I don't have to worry about any parts from the saw hanging over, but the door on the right side is where the motor for the saw is, so I'm going to have to trace it out and cut around it, as you'll see here. So instead of cutting it straight down and making the door a lot smaller with a lot of gaps, I thought I would be fancy and trace around the motor of the saw and give myself about a 1/2 inch of clearance. That way it would be a nice tight fit, giving us less space for dust to escape. Things were going way too smoothly today. I'm sitting here looking how nice this cut is. You know, that slides right in there. I didn't take into account the actual function of how these miter saws work. It's been a long day. So this saw can't cut now. So I'm going to have to basically cut that straight down. That way this saw can actually do its full range of motion. Then we should be in business. I'll give myself an extra 1/2 inch or so and just, this is harder than it looks. Probably go about to there. So I can come straight down and give me an angle That way I'm only having to cut this much off. This as a straight edge. Come straight down to this point. Then we're going to cut over. Perfect. Look at that. So probably 90% of my cuts on here are going to be just like this, but I put these doors on there with hinges. That way I can open them if we need to make an angled cut. So I still have full range of motion with this thing. And say I want to cut to right there, I can close that door still and operate. All right, so $1 million question, does it actually work? Just for comparison, in case you forgot, this is what it was doing before we added the dust hood. Now I'm gonna crank up the dust collector and make a cut, see what we got. I didn't see any dust come out this way, and virtually no dust even made it past this point. I did see a little bit come up right here, but it sucked it right back in. So the dust collector along with this hood definitely works. This is gonna keep the shop much cleaner and cause me less work.
As always, guys, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and be sure to hit that subscribe button so you can catch all of our videos.